So holding Tractate Menachot, page 71, A1, Ayin Aleph. Rabbi Yeshua, the Dore, Rabbi Yeshua of his generation, Lo Yitesov, Akoroi, Chad Demforashos Leilamas Nisin. Do not sit down until you explain this Mishnah. Menayin la'omer shematir ba'ashrosha. From where do we know that the omer permits new grain that has taken root but not grown at all? Menalon dichtiv aviv. It says ripe ears. Aviv referring to ripe ears. This pasuk specifies that the grain used for the omer must be ripe. Lav miklal deika de lav oviv. Does this not imply that there are crops that are not ripe but are nevertheless included in the omer permits? Because of this question, the Gemara says the lav oviv. Granted, the omer permits grain that is not ripe, ulo olam the ayel shalish, but it is still must have grown to a third of its final size. So how do we know about a grain that just rooted? Rather, the Gemara using a different answer. Pasuk says mehochel chermish, from when the sickle is first put to the standing crop. Lav miklal deika de lav bar chemish. Does this not imply that there are crops that are not fit for the sickle, but nevertheless included in the omer permit? The Gemara says the lav bar chermish u'loilom shachas. Granted that omer permits a grain that is not fit for the sickle, u'loilom shachas, but it is still must be at the stage of a fodder, animal's food, meaning it must be fit for consumption by animals. Grain that has only just taken root, however, does not fall within the scope of the omer permit. So we find the Gemara is continuously trying to find a proof for the grain that was just rooted, if it's included in the omer offering or it's not included in the omer offering. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, komo lav miklal de lav bar komo. So using the continuation of the verse, it says mehochel chermish bakomo. What is komo? Komo is a standing crop. Lav miklal de lav bar komo. Does this not imply that there is grain that is not in the category of a standing crop? Grain has just taken root, but is nevertheless included in the omer permit. The Gemara says the lav bar komo u'lo magom. Granted that the omer permits grain that is not in the category of a standing crop, u'lo agom, but it still must be bendable. However, the grain has not reached even this stage to be bendable, but has only just taken root. The omer does not permit it. Rather, we're using the answer to include a grain that was just taken root from the word asher tizra. What do I learn from the word asher tizra? That you sow mishat zriya, from the time of sowing. Amar le Rav Papa le Rava, if that's the case, mishat zriya, from the time of sowing, then even if it didn't take root, I should include it in the omer permit. Omarlei Sudoni Basode Kesiv Toras Kalo. It is written in the field. This tells us that the permit takes effect only on grain that has become part of the field by taking root in it. So only becoming part of the field once it decomposes and starts to take root. Interesting, the language of the Gemara, that he calls him Sudoni. So the word Sudoni translate in note 14, the word Sudoni translate literally as a possessor of the secret. It is used to refer to a Torah scholar in accordance with the verse that states, Soid havai leireov The secret of Hashem is reserved for those who fear Him. Alternatively, Sudoni is a name given to one who brews beer. Sudoni. Rava addressed Rav Papa with the title because this was Rav Papa's profession. A brewer is called a possessor of the secret because brewing beer is a wonderful secret which allows one to simultaneously amass wealth and perform acts of kindness. So probably we should change our professions and start brewing beer.
Nice. A brewer is a producer?
Yeah. A brewery is a place where they make beer. Yeah. Yeah, you take pictures, yeah. So you know all the secrets because you took pictures of everything.
That's right, it's all in there.
They make you sign anything before?
No, I still know all the geniuses there. The brewmasters is what they call them. The ones that come up with the recipes for everything.
Okay. So, Koitzim Beis HaShlochin Shebarmokim. We want to take a little break. The nose, I think it's going to be heard afterwards.
Yeah, swallow not easy.
No, it's good. Thank you.
Okay, Koitzim Beis HaShlochin Shebarmokim. We may harvest the irrigated fields of the valleys. So the Gemara mentioned it yesterday, but the whole idea of Beis HaShlochin, it's the valleys that don't get much water. Aval Goichin, but we may not stack the harvested grain until after the harvesting of the Omer. So you should allow to cut it even before the Omer, but you should not pile it up. Anshe Yericho, those who, the residents of Yericho, Koitzim B'Ritzon Chachomim, they would harvest a grain before the Omer, in accordance with the will of Chachomim. V'goichin shalei b'ritzon Chachomim, would stack it against the wishes of the sages. So the rabbis were not comfortable with them stacking the grain.
Because they're going to eat.
Yes. V'loi michu b'yodam, but however the sages did not reprove them, so we learned that the reason why the rabbis didn't go after them, because it was not a biblical prohibition. Koitzer l'shachas machi leveimo. One may harvest unripe grain and feed it to the animal. Omar Rabbi Yehuda will say, when does this apply? Bizman shemaschil ad shloi v'shlish. When one begins harvesting the grain before it reaches a third of its growth. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon disagree with him. Rabbi Shimon omer, ikzer v'yachil af mishehei v'shlish. One may harvest unripe grain before the Omer and feed it to an animal even after the grain has reached a third of its growth. V'koitzrin mipnei netios, we may harvest a new grain before harvesting the Omer because of saplings. Either the grain is damaging the saplings, or the other way around, but regardless, you're allowed to remove the grain because of saplings. Mipnei beis ha'ovel, or because of a place of mourning, if they needed a tent, a place for mourners to come. The custom is not to do it specifically in the house, so they usually create a tent outside for mourners, and if the grain was there, even though the Omer is not yet was not time for the Omer, you're allowed to harvest it and use it for the use of space.
Yeah.
It just reminded me, I have an uncle who passed away yesterday. His name was Rabbi Shimon ben Yaakov, so we'll learn for his elevation of his neshama. Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Yaakov. So, mipnei bitul beis hamidrash, because of the also not disturbing the study hall. So if they needed more room for students to come, and these grain were in the way, they're allowed to remove them before the Omer. one may not make of the stalks of grain tied bundles. Aval manichom tzvosim. Rather, one leaves them untied. Again, the same idea. Once you tie them, it's easier to bring them to the home and eat them before the time. So as the Mishnah rule that in the cases just mentioned, saplings, a mourning place, and in the study hall, we are not permitted to go beyond the mere cutting of the grain. The harvester may not gather and tie the grain into bundles. Rather, he leaves each harvested handful untied where it was ripped. And the reason for this ruling will be given in the Gemara in 72a. So we'll get to that, why you should not bundle them up. Mitzvah ha'emer lava min hakom. The commandment of the Omer requested to come from the standing crop. Lo motzo, however, if the court did not find unharvested grain, Yavi min ha'imorim, let it bring the offering from previously cut sheaves. Mitzvosoi lova min halach. The commandment of the Omer requires it to come from moist kernels of perfect freshness. Lo motzo, however, if the court did not find moist, fresh grain, Yavi yavish, let it bring the offering from dried out grain. Mitzvosoi liktzor balaylo. The commandment of the Omer requires them to harvest on the night of the 16th of Nisan. Niktzar bayoim, if it was harvested on the day of the 16th, kosher. V'doiches haShabbos, and the Omer overrides the Shabbos. These type of meloches, work, is forbidden on Shabbat, but since the 16th of Nisan fell on Shabbat, you would be allowed to do it on Shabbat. Tanya Rabbi Binyamin Eimer, the Gemara says, or Binyamin says, Kosu v'echad Eimer uktzartem es tziro v'aveisem es Eimer. One pasuk says, uktzartem es tziro, you reap its harvest, v'aveisem es Eimer, you shall bring the Omer offering. Uchsiv reishis tzichem al kohen. And then there's another. The continuation of this pasuk says, the first of your harvest to the kohen. So now there's two types of implications, two contradicting implications. The first implication tells us that you harvest the omer, you reap its harvest, and then you shall bring an omer offering, implying that a person is permitted to harvest his grain before the omer is harvested. And then it says Reshis Tzichem al Kohen in the same verse, which means that the very first grain that we harvest must be that of the omer. Ha-ketzad. So how do you reconcile it? Ha-ketzad mimokim shata mevi ata keitzer, mimokim shiata mevi ata keitzer. If it's a place that you're allowed to bring, as we learned in the Mishnah, it has to be plumpy and moist, then you shouldn't cut it before the Omer. But if it's already a dry place, like the Beis HaShlochin, the place of the valleys, dried grain, then you're allowed to cut it, even before the Omer. Eima mimin shata mevi ata koitzer, mimin she'iyata mevi ata koitzer. The Gemara says, 1 second, maybe instead of interpreting it by the location, if the location is growing plumpy grain versus a place that is producing dried grain, maybe we should look at the species. If it's barley, you shouldn't cut it. And if it's other types of grain, like oats, spelt, rye, then or wheat, then you should be allowed to do it. The Gemara answer is Ahu lo motzis omot. This you cannot say with Rabbi Yochanan, for we know from that which Rabbi Yochanan taught Gezerah Shava between Chodosh and Chala. that all of the 5 grains are included in the Chadash prohibition. So therefore you cannot distinguish or differentiate between the other types of grain to barley. You treat them all the same. They're all under the umbrella of Chadash. It should not be harvested until the Omer is bought, and the Omer permits them all. So we learned in the Mishnah that the residents of Yericho would harvest the grain in accordance with the will of the rabbi, but they would pile up the grain against the will of the rabbis. Would stack it against the wishes of the sages. Man shamat le'de'oma, whom have you heard say michu v'lo michu? The sages reproved, or the sages did not reprove. How do you know? Maybe the sages did reprove them. We learned in the Mishnah that the rabbis didn't say anything. It is Rabbi Yehuda who employed this terminology in a Baita concerning various practices of the Jews of Yericho. Since our Mishnah too speaks of reproving the people of Yericho, it may be attributed to Rabbi Yehuda. Based on the attribution of our Mishnah to Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara identifies a seeming contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda's ruling. V'sova Rabbi Yehuda hold the harvesting of the residents of Yericho was performed in accordance with the wishes of the rabbis. They agreed with it. How do you say that? But it has been taught in a Baita, Shisha Dvarim Osu. Anshe Yericho, the residents of Yericho followed 6 practices. They did 6 things. Shloisha b'rtzein chachamim v'shloisha sheloi b'rtzein chachamim. 3 were the rabbis agreed, and 3 the rabbis were not comfortable with. What are the 3 that they did in accordance with the wishes of the sages? Malkivin the kolim kol hayoim. They would graft palm trees the entire day of the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach. Now look at 41. What's the problem with grafting saplings on the 14th of Nisan? It is, right, the eve of Pesach. It is forbidden to perform labor on Erev Pesach after midday. Nevertheless, the people of Yericho would graft palm trees throughout the day, even after midday. After midday, everyone agrees that you shouldn't be involved with anything besides getting ready for the night, for the Seder. Yes, it says 3 things the rabbis were not happy, they were not comfortable with.
This is one of them.
Yeah, so the Gemara in Psachim 56a explains that they would inject into the palm a solution made of other plants. This resembles grafting in that products from other trees are integrated with the palm tree. Alternatively, they would graft branches from one palm tree onto another. The Yerichoans, the residents of Yericho, maintained that this was not significant labor, and so was not prohibited on Erev Pesach. The sages agreed. This was one of the things that the sages were comfortable with.
This is not kilaim.
No, grafting is not kilaim.
When you put
The branch,
okay.
it's not kilaim. Kilaim is you're putting 2 seeds in the ground, or that you're planting under a tree. You have vegetables growing under a tree, it's considered kilaim.
And grafting is when you're joining 2 trees in the branch.
Right. Or in this case, another thing that they did, inject solution made of other plants into the tree. Okay? So that was one practice that they did, and the rabbis were okay with it. V'choirchin es Shema. They would wrap the Shema. So what does it mean, wrap the Shema? In 42 it says the Shema is a compilation of biblical verses that are required to recite twice daily, right? The people of Yericho, when recite the Shema, when reciting the Shema, would not pause between its first and second lines, between the phrase Hashem Echad, Hashem is one, and V'ahavta, and you shall love. By failing to separate between these verses, they in effect wrapped the Shema into a bundle. Note that this is only one of several explanations offered in the Gemara there, Sir Rabbeinu Gershom. This Tana, Rabbi Meir, states that this practice did not contravene the will of the sages. In other words, he maintains that there is no obligation, biblical or rabbinic, to separate between these two verses. How do we separate? Because we say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuto L'Olam, but they didn't say it.
They decide by the sages say you're not allowed.
That was their minhag. That was their custom. The sages didn't. It said they did it in accordance with the sages.
So they didn't actually wrap the words around the tree. They just, when they said it, they just combined the verses.
Yeah, they bundled it up. That's what. And they would harvest the new grain before the Omer. So we got these three things: the grafting, the bundling of the Shema, and the harvesting before the Omer. Birtzen Chachomim, all in accordance with the wishes of the sages. Now, ve'elu sheloi birtzen Chachomim, and these are the practices that were not in accordance with the wishes of the sages. Goychin lifnei ha'omer, they would stack the harvested grain before the Omer. Umatirin gamzir shel hekdesh shel chor v'shel shikmo, and they would permit for personal benefit branches of carob and sycamore trees belonging to the temple treasury. Ufertzim protzis beganisein uvefardoisisein. They would make breaches in the fences of their gardens and orchards. La'achil nosho la'anim b'shnei v'tzeres u'b'shabosis u'yam tevim. In order to feed the fallen fruit to the poor on Shabbos and festival during years of famine. So let's look at the commentary on each one. The first one, it says, we learned Goychin lifnei omer. We know what it means, but look at 44. You see above note 17. Note 17 says that prohibition against stacking this grain is of rabbinic origin. The rabbis feared that while working with the Chodesh grain, the workers would unthinkingly come to eat it, which is forbidden. So that's the main reason why not to stack it. They shouldn't come to eat it. Then, and they would permit for personal benefit branches of carob and sycamore trees belong to the temple treasury. So 45, it is common agricultural practice to prune the branches of carob and sycamore trees every 7 years. You know what pruning is, right? The trimming of the tree. Mm-hmm. That was the pruning practice. It makes the tree grow higher and better. So this practice was done every 7 years, for this causes new, thicker branches to grow in their place. It happened that the early inhabitants of Yericho consecrated their carob and sycamore trees just after the branches were pruned. In other words, they said that this goes to the temple, belongs to the temple. That's what it means, consecrated. Eventually, when new branches grew, their descendants cut off these branches and derived personal benefit from them. So they're saying, hey, it's not anymore hekdesh because it's new branches. Notwithstanding the general prohibition against deriving personal benefit from consecrated property. People of Yericho argued that their forefathers had consecrated only the trunks of the trees from which the temple treasury would fashion wooden beams. Carob and sycamore trees are primarily used for beams. The branches, however, were never consecrated and so were permitted for benefit. Although these branches grew from consecrated property, the resident of Yericho took the view that the subsequent growth of consecrated property is not subject to the prohibition against deriving personal benefit. The sages argued that although benefiting from subsequent growth is not biblically prohibited, it is prohibited by rabbinic decree. So the rabbis were not comfortable from them deriving benefit from these consecrated branches, more correctly consecrated trunks, and the branches came from this consecrated trunks. Okay?
I agree with that.
ופורצין פרצות בגנותיהם ובפרדסותיהם להאכיל נושר לעניים בשני בצורת בשבוס יום טוב. So what did they do over here? It says in 46, the poor would enter the gardens on the Shabbat and would eat the fruit that had fallen to the ground beneath the trees. The sages opposed this practice, for they feared that the poor would ascend the trees and pick fruit that was still attached. They opened the gates, and now the poor is there, and ultimately will violate the Shabbat. The people of Yericho were not concerned for this possibility. Div Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda, im birtzon chachamim enosin, yehu kol adam osim ken. If the three that you mentioned that were done birtzon chachamim, in accordance with the wishes of the sages, then why not everybody does it? If most people don't do it, it shows that nothing is in accordance with the wishes of the rabbis. Rather, these practices and those practices were not performed in accordance with the wishes of the sages. However, for 3 of the 6 practices, the sages reproved them. For 3, they did not reprove them, even though they disapproved. And these are the practices which the sages did not reprove them, are given the kolin kol hayom, that they would graft palm trees the entire day on the 14th of Nisan. They would bundle, they would wrap the Shema, would say the Shema and Ve'avta together, and they would harvest and stack the new grain before the Omer. And these are the practices which they did reprove the people of Yericho. That they would permit for personal benefit branches of carob and sycamore trees belong to the temple treasury, and they would make breaches in the fences of their gardens and orchards. Nosho means noisher, it falls down, anything that fell down from the tree, la'anim b'shnei batzeres, to the poor in the years of famine, b'shabbosis u'v'yom tovim, which was done on Shabbos and festivals. They would come, and the poor would come and eat from it. V'noistim peyo layork, and they would give peah from vegetables. Umichu biyadam. Peah is also peot. They have to leave some hair growing over here. It says number 1, peah, literally corner, edge, is the part of a crop that a farmer must leave standing for the poor. So if you have a, let's picture this to be a field. So when you harvest the field, you shouldn't harvest it all the way. In the corners, you should leave a little bit. And over here, you should leave a little bit. All the corners. Why? So the pool can come and take some. V'noisnin peah layork, and they would give peah from vegetables. So michu biyadam. Why michu biyadam? So why did they reprove them? So look at number 1 again. Peah, literally corner edge, is the part of a crop that a farmer must leave standing for the poor. An important aspect of peah is that it is exempt from meiser. You don't have to tithe what you left to the poor. Tithe given to the Levi. The poor who take peah need not separate meiser from it. Now vegetables are exempt from peah. They didn't have to do it. This is taught in a Mishnah in peah. The Mishnah in peah that deals with what do you have to live, what is your obligation to live, and what is not, which states that peah obligation is limited to foods that can be stored for a long time without spoiling, like grain. The Gemara explains that this excludes vegetables which are perishable. Hence, if a farmer leaves peah standing in his vegetable field, the poor may not eat it without tithing it, since the vegetables are not true peah, but are ordinary food. So he has not the poor has to give meiser from this. Now, the poor people of Yericho did not realize that the gifts of vegetables, peah, were not true peah. True peah is something that you don't have to give meiser. You don't have to tithe. And now they have to tithe it. So they therefore neglected to tithe them before consumption, thereby violating the rabbinic prohibition against eating untithed vegetables. The obligation to take meiser from vegetables is of a rabbinic origin only. This drew a protest from the sages.
How would they tithe the vegetables if they went to collect it?
10%.
Yeah, whatever you got, give.
And then you give to the Kohen?
Levi. It's called Meiser Rishon. You give to the Levi 10% of your earnings, and the Levi would give from that 10% to the Kohen. The Kohen would receive something else. It's called Terumah Gedolah. Would get a donation, but it didn't have a number. You can give him whatever you wanted. But from the Levi, he had to get 10% of what the Levi got. It's called Meiser Mina Meiser. What the Levi has to give, it's called Meiser, tithing from tithing. And the Meiser that we give the Levi is called Meiser Rishon. Yeah. Then there is something called Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is that we have to take 10%. The soil has to take 10%, take it to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim. It's yours, but you have to eat it in Yerushalayim. So this designation makes it holy, and you cannot eat it anywhere else. You have to eat it in Yerushalayim. If you have too much, you can redeem it with money and take the money to Yerushalayim, buy food in Yerushalayim, and eat it over there. But according to your assertion that the Braisa, that in the Braisa, Rabbi Yehuda rules that the harvest of Yericho was performed against the will of the sages. There is an inconsistency in the Braisa itself. Consider the total number of practices examined by the Braisa, because we didn't learn about peah before, that it was the practice of the people of Yericho. Suddenly, the Braita brings up this peah. We never learned about peah over here. So it says, you said Shisha, they were in fact 6, as the Braita stated. Shiva Avu, now there are actually 7. So, Ella, rather, Sami Mikon Kesira, you must delete from here from Rabbi Yehuda's segment of the Baita, the case of harvesting before the Omer. The Baita remains only 6 cases. So the answer is remove the harvesting before the Omer and you'll have 6. The resolution of the Baita's internal contradiction serves also to resolve the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Baita regarding Rabbi Yehuda reference to the harvest of Yericho. Now that this reference has been expunged from the Baita, the conflict is resolved. One may harvest unripe grain, as we learned in the Mishnah, in order to feed the unripe grain to an animal. It's obviously before the Omer. Tenan also, we learned in the Mishnah there, these following separation serve to divide a field in two with regards to payer's obligation. Look at number 5. It says, we explained earlier that payer is the portion of the field that a farmer must leave standing for the poor. The Torah described payer as peyas sodecho, or peyas sodcho, the payer of your field. This teaches that a separate payer must be left in each and every field. The Mishnah enumerates the various separations that cause a single field to be regarded as 2 separate fields, and so become liable to separate gifts of payer.
What about the vegetables field?
No, we learned, we have the rule. The rule is anything that is perishable is not under the laws of payer. Produce is perishable. Like vegetables are perishable. They don't last for too long. Once you don't have to do payer. And also the rabbis were uncomfortable with it because it would cause people to mistakenly think that they don't have to give maaser. They needed to give maaser on vegetables. So we are trying to find out what constitute division of a field, because if you divide the field to 2, then you have to do pair twice, not one time. So it says, "Ve'elu mafsikin lefeo." These following separations serve to divide a field into 2 with regards to the pair obligation: hanachal, ve'ashlulis, ve'derech hayochid, ve'derech harabim. I think over here he's using the word ravine, but nachal usually it's a river or it says alternatively it is a river. That's what a deep ravine running between 2 sections of a field explains that a nachal is a rocky, not arable strip of land. Alternatively, it is a river. If a ravine bisects a field, the owner is obligated to leave pair from each side. That's the idea. You have to leave pair from both sides. V'derech v'ashlulis, a pond of rainwater. V'derech hayochid, v'derech harabim. If there is a private road that divides the field, you have to give payer both places, both sides. V'derech harabim, or it's a public road. Ushvil harabim, ushvil hayochid, hakavua, even if it's not per se road, it's just a public path or a private path which is in constant use, hakavua, that it's always being used, b'moisa chamo, b'moisa geshomim, during the winter and during the summer. Ba'abur, and the fallow field, meaning a field that is not used. V'hanir, a plowed field. V'zera acher, and a row planted with a different seed than the surrounding rows. So you have over here wheat and then you have barley. So you have to, it's considered 2 fields. This was zera acher, and a row planted with different seed than the surrounding rows. V'koitzer lashachas, and if one harvests a strip of unripe grain in the middle of the field, mafsik, the harvested area, divides the field into two. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. So you have a field and you harvested in the middle, it was unripe. According to Rabbi Meir, that constitutes two fields now. You divided the fields.
Even if it's the same grain,
It's the same thing.
Yeah,
These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that the reaping of unripe grain is not considered a legally significant act of harvesting. Accordingly, this harvest is viewed not as the first stage in the harvest of the entire field, but as an independent act of cutting. It therefore serves to divide the larger field into two smaller fields. The harvested area does not divide the field in two unless he subsequently plowed the field. The sages hold that the reaping of unripe grain is legally a significant act of harvesting. Accordingly, this harvest is regarded as the first stage in the harvest of the entire field. As such, it does not divide the field into two. So we have the opinion of Rabbi Meir that it does divide the field, unripe grain. If you harvested just one row, it considered two fields, and according to the rabbis, it's not. The harvested area does not divide the field unless he subsequently plowed the field. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Meir, B'shit Rabbi Shimon Amora. Rabbi Meir stated his final ruling in accordance with the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon, who said, the Omar Yikzer v'yachil af mishevi shlish. One may harvest unripe grain before the Omer and feed it to an animal even after the grain has reached a third of its growth. One may harvest and feed it to an animal even after, right? We said the opinion of Rabbi Shimon was more lenient in the Mishnah. Ela kasova, kol shachas lav ketzirohi. We said Rabbi Shimon holds that any harvest of unripe grain, even that of grain which has grown a third, is not a legally significant act of harvesting. Rabbi Meir's ruling regarding the division of a field for peah accords with the view of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara presents an objection to Rabbi Yochanan's analysis. Yosef Rabba v'kamar lo lehoshmaito. Rava was sitting and was repeating this teaching of Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Meir's ruling accords with the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon. Eisi v'Rava chabaruna l'Rava, Rava chabaruna challenged Rava on the basis of the Braisa, Cholochogov, locust devoured it. So a strip of crops in the middle of a field was devoured by locust.
What is locust?
It's like a bug. You know, some say that it's kosher. Okay. Famous plague in Mitzrayim.
Ah, locust. Okay. Gafniot.
Is it a grasshopper?
Yeah, grasshopper.
Why do you say locust? Is it the same thing? Grasshopper?
Same idea. Locusts devoured it, a strip of crops in the middle of the field. Kirsemu anemolim, or ants, severed it. Shibartahu haruach, the wind broke it down. Hakol moidim, both Rabbi Meir and the sages agree that this is the law. Chorash mafsik. If he subsequently plowed this area, it divides the field into two with regards to peah. Lo chorash eino mafsik. If he did not subsequently plow this area, it does not divide the field into two with regard to peah.
To plow is to put something that make it grow?
Yeah, plow usually is a process that was done before the planting. It prepares the soil by flipping the soil, by turning the soil around. It helps the growth. You make the dirt smoother.
Arar.
And
You mix
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
soil. Okay.
No, this is only to pay to leave for the poor, not for Maser Tithim.
no, but here he says what happened if you had all this, if your field was damaged by all these different possibilities, either the locust or the ants or the wind. Everyone agrees that if he subsequently plowed this area, then he created a division in the field, and therefore he breaks the field into two. But if he didn't act upon it, they damaged one area. He left it alone. He didn't plow it right away. Then einu mafsik. Then it's not considered a division, and the field is not divided into two. Hakol moidi man. Who is the Braita referring to when it states all agree? Rabbi Meir. It is referring to Rabbi Meir, who states in the Mishnah in Peah that if one harvests a strip of unripe grain, it divides his field into two even if it is not subsequently plowed. Here, however, Rabbi Meir agrees that unless the decimated strip is plowed, decimated meaning the damaged one, it does not divide the field. Only if you went and plowed it after. This is understandable if you say that the Mishnah discusses a case in which the grain has not yet reached a third of its growth. B'raiso, while the Braiso, the Chorash in lo Chorash lo, which states that if he did plow the strip, yes, it does divide the field, but if he did not plow it, no, it does not divide the field. B'shei v'shlish discusses a case in which the grain has already reached a third of its growth. This would explain why Rabbi Meir differentiates between the harvested strip of the Mishnah and the decimated strip of the Braisa. Let's read 19. Rav Acha bar Huna is trying to account for the conflict between Rabbi Meir's two rulings. In the Mishnah in Peah, Rabbi Meir states that if a person reaps a strip of unripe grain in the middle of a field, the harvested area divides the field into two with respect to Peah. In the Braisa, he states that if insects devour a strip of unripe grain in the middle of a field, the decimated strip does not divide the field in two with respect to Peah. Rav Acha bar Huna offers the following explanation. The Mishnah is dealing with unripe grain that has not attained even a third of its growth. The reaping of such grain is not considered to be an act of harvesting. Therefore, the harvest of the dividing strip is not regarded as the first stage in the harvest of the combined field. Therefore, the strip divides the field into. The Braisa, however, is dealing with grain that, although unripe, has attained a third of its growth. Accordingly, its consumption by insects or its destruction by wind is seen as the first stage in the harvest that will take place when the rest of the grain ripens. Therefore, the decimated strip of land does not serve to divide the field in two unless it is subsequently plowed. Rav Acha bar Huna will now demonstrate that this explanation suffices only if Rabbi Meir is not in accord with Rabbi Shimon. If, however, Rabbi Meir follows the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon, the two rulings remain in conflict. Okay. Elai Omat Masnisin Nami 71b3. So Elai Omat Masnisin Nami B'Shei Shlish. But if you say that the Mishnah also discusses a case in which the grain has reached a third of its growth, as it must, if Rabbi Meir is following the view of Rabbi Shimon, you are faced with a difficulty. Hashta, consider now, Uma Hosam de Ketzira, the Odom, if in that case, the Mishnahs, where the harvesting is performed by a person. Omar Rabbi Meir lo yishmo ketziro. Rabbi Meir state that it is not considered harvesting. Ocho, then in the case where the harvesting, in parentheses, the word harvesting, is performed by locusts and ants, by insects, lo kol sheken, is how much more so that it's not going to be considered harvesting. By this reasoning, Rabbi Meir should hold that the decimated strip does not, or does, divide the field into two. Instead, Rabbi Meir states that unless the strip is plowed subsequently, right after this damage of the insects, it does not divide the field. This is a contradiction. It emerges that the Mishnah and Braisa can be reconciled only if Rabbi Meir does not intend his ruling in the Mishnah to apply to grain that has reached a third of its growth. This means that Rabbi Meir cannot accord with the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan is refuted. Having rejected Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation of Rabbi Meir's ruling in the Mishnah in Peah, the Gemara now attempts an alternative interpretation, again drawing a connection between Rabbi Meir's ruling and our Mishnah. El Rabbi Meir b'shitas Rabbi Yehuda Amor de Omar. Rather, Rabbi Meir stated his ruling in accordance with the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda, who said, regarding our Mishnah statement that one may harvest unripe grain prior to the Omer in order to feed it to an animal. A Mosai, when does this apply? Bizman she'ischil ad shelo yehevi shlish. When one begins harvesting the grain before it reaches a third of its growth. Aval im itchilat shehevi shlish also. However, it is implied if he began harvesting after the grain reached a third of its growth, it is prohibited. Rabbi Yehuda maintains that the reaping of grain that has not attained a third of its growth is not considered a legally significant act of harvesting, and may therefore be performed before the Omer. If however the grain has attained a third of its growth, the reaping is legally regarded as an act of harvesting, and therefore may not be performed before the Omer. This view coincides with that of Rabbi Meir, who in the Mishnah in Peah and the previously cited Braita draws the same distinction between grain that has attained a third of its growth and grain that has not.
Now the last subject. If the locusts eat your grains, your field, why do you have to give more tzedakah? It's not your fault.
Right, but only if you plowed the field right after. If you
If
plowed,
you plowed, not plowed.
no, because the rabbis looked at, evaluate your intentions. What is your intention by plowing the field? Why did you plow it? The insect came and ate. Plowing it, it's not eating. Plowing it is preparing, is like preparing the soil for planting. So plowing it, the rabbi said, oh, you're plowing it, you're creating a division in the field. You're creating a separation. If you're creating a separation in the field, you, the farmer, are considering it two separate fields. If you didn't plow it after, it's not considered two fields. But if you did, then it makes it two fields. It's like you're preparing this row for something else,
Okay.
for planting something in there. Eimer the Shomas Rabbi Yehuda, with regards to what have you heard, Rabbi Yehuda, that the reaping of grain that has not attained a third of its growth is not considered to be an act of harvesting. Livehemo, with regard to grain harvested for an animal, le'odom, but with regard to grain harvested for a person, mi shomatlei, have you heard Rabbi Yehuda say this? Of course not. When a person reaps for the sake of a human being, Rabbi Yehuda holds that he may, under no circumstances, do so before the Omer, even if the grain has not attained a third of its growth. Rabbi Meir, however, states his law even in the case of grain harvested for the sake of a person. Clearly, Rabbi Meir is not following the view of Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, we are making a distinction between animal food and human food. Human food, I don't care when you did it. If it reached the third, didn't reach the third, it's considered harvesting. When it's animal, he's not considering it harvesting.
If it's a third of the growth, does it mean that it's less grain, or it's the same amount of grain, just not ripe?
Regardless, it could be even higher than a third. It can grow more than a third, but still not be ripe.
Yeah.
But it has
Same amount of grains in it.
It could be same or it could be less. It can be more plumpy or more moist. But less than a third, it's for sure not only unripe, it's also very little to cut. So if it's for animal food, they're not considering it harvesting. The Gemara demonstrates that Rabbi Yehuda's ruling cannot apply where the grain is intended for human consumption. The imken, for if it were so, that even human consumption is not considered harvesting, that Rabbi Yehuda states is ruling even where the grain is harvested for people. There would be three conflicting Tanoic views in our Mishnah regarding this matter, and this cannot be. Perforce, Rabbi Yehuda's law is stated only with regard to grain harvested for animals, which means that the ruling of Rabbi Meir does not coincide with that of Rabbi Yehuda. Let's look for a second at 25. If Rabbi Yehuda's ruling would apply where the grain is intended for human consumption, the Mishnah would contain three conflicting views. The first would be the view of Tanna Kama, who states explicitly that it is permissible to harvest grain to feed an animal before the Omer. The second would be the view of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds A, that this applies only where the harvesting began before the grain attained a third of its growth, and B, that it applies even if the grain is harvested to feed a person. The third would be the view of Rabbi Shimon, who maintains that harvesting may begin even after the grain has attained a third of its growth, and may be performed even for the sake of a person. According to this rendering, Rabbi Yehuda is disputing the Tanna Kama. This, however, is impossible, for the Gemara in Sanhedrin 25a states that wherever Rabbi Yehuda prefaces his comments with the word Eimosai, when does this apply? He means to explain the ruling of the preceding Tana, not to dispute it. So the word Eimosai comes to explain the Tana, not to dispute it. It follows that in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Tanna Kama. Perforce, his ruling is stated only with regards to grain harvested for animals, in accordance with the stated view of the Tanna Kama. The rule concerning Rabbi Yehuda's prefatory Eimosai is actually the subject of an Amoraic dispute in Sanhedrin. See Oir Hayosho for discussion. Ela ki also Rav Dimi Omar, going back to the Gemara, rather, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said, Rabbi Meir Beshilas, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi. Rabbi Meir was following the reasoning of Rabbi Akiva, his teacher. Omar, Af lehodom nami, when he stated that even in the case of grain reaped for a person, if the grain has not attained a third of its growth, loy havyok tziro, it's not considered harvesting. That none, hamenamer sode, if one harvests a field in patches. That's why it's called menamer, is the word of in Hebrew. Namer is a leopard. So this guy, he harvests a field in patches. So the leopard has patches. So menamer sode, make menamer sode if one harvests a field in patches. Veshir b'klochim lachim, and leaves over in the unharvested portions green stalks. Rabbi Akiva Imer, Peya lechol echod ve'echod. The owner must leave peya in each and every section, for the bare sections divide the fields into many separate fields.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea at all.
If you do like this,
Now you have to do peya. But the sages say, me'echod ala kreil, he may leave peya from one of the sections for all the sections. For all the sections harvested and unharvested are deemed a single field. So according to Chachamim, it's not a problem. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's a losing proposition. Ve'omar Rabbi Yehuda Omar Shmuel. Regarding this Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Lo yichyev Rabbi Akiva ela b'menamer lekloyos. Rabbi Akiva required a separate pair for each section, only where one harvested in patches for the purpose of producing toasted kernels, which are made of grain that has not attained a third of its growth. Since the ripping of such grain is not legally recognized an act of harvesting, the bare areas divide the single field into many separate fields. So again, since the reaping of such grain is not legally recognized an act of harvesting, the bare areas divide the single field into many separate fields. Aval b'menamer lo itzo. So rather than doing it for toasting the kernels, but where one harvested in patches in order to store and age the grain, which is done with fully ripened grain. I guess you cannot do it with the unripe grain. You cannot store it or age it. Loi, the bare areas do not divide the field. Now, toasted kernels are intended for human consumption. According to Shmuel, then Rabbi Akiva rules that when grain that has not reached a third of its growth is ripped for a person, it is not regarded as legally significant act of harvesting. His position precisely parallels that of Rabbi Meir. The Gemara questions the assertion that Rabbi Akiva stated his ruling only with regards to a toasted kernels. Eini, it is so, veho ki also Ravin. Omar Rabbi Yechon, but when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, he said in the name of Rabbi Yechonon, Mechayev Rabbi Akiva, v'menamer lo itzu. Rabbi Akiva required a separate pair for each section, even where one harvested in patches in order to store the grain. According to Rabbi Yechonon, Rabbi Akiva states his ruling even with regard to fully ripened grain that was harvested for people. This is not in consonance with the view of Rabbi Meir.
Rabbi Akiva is more Mahmir.
Yes, but according to Rabbi Yechonon, he is not differentiating between toasted grain to aged grain. In other words, he's not differentiating between unripe grain and ripe grain. Unripe grain is for toasting, specifically. Ripened grain, if you harvest it when it's ripened, that means that you want to age it. You want to age it.
Oh, okay.
You want to keep it for years.
So Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Meir both have different perspectives on what Rabbi Akiva
Exactly, is how they interpret Rabbi Akiva, the teacher. Soval kavose bechado ufoligale bechado. Rabbi Meir agrees with Rabbi Akiva concerning one matter, and so this is the. Now we're starting the Menachos of today, right? We have another daf to do that. That's just today. What we did up till now was for Shabbos. So I don't know if you want to section it off.